1955 was a banner year for American car culture. The economy was booming, the highways were expanding, and the cars, flashy, colorful, and packed with chrome, symbolized prosperity. But underneath the glittering exteriors, something ugly lurked, a total disregard for driver and passenger safety. Safety belts were rare, steering columns were deadly spears in a collision, and weak bodies folded like tin foil on impact. Manufacturers were racing to sell dreams of freedom and power, not security. And the result? Cars that were beautiful but deadly. Here are 9 of the most dangerously built American cars of 1955, rolling reminders that style came first, survival came last.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. In 1955, Ford debuted the Fairlane as its new top-of-the-line model, named after Henry Ford's estate. It was built to capture the excitement of a booming America. Bigger families, bigger highways, and a bigger appetite for flash and flare. The Fairlane fit the mood perfectly. It came with bright two-tone paint schemes, generous chrome trim, and a modern, low-slung profile that screamed 1950s optimism. However, behind the glittery surface, the 1955 Fairlane suffered from the same fatal flaw that plagued much of Detroit's output in this era. It was designed to be seen, not to protect. The Fairlane's body was stylish, but dangerously fragile by modern standards. The doors were thin-skinned, made with relatively light-gauge steel to reduce weight and cost. No side impact protection, no side beams, no reinforced sills, and nothing between you and another car in a collision. The pillars were narrow and mostly decorative, offering minimal rollover resistance. The roof structure, though pretty, would crumple like a soda can in a rollover accident. At the time, visual appeal outweighed structural survivability, and Ford, like others, sold customers a dream, not a crash rating. Inside the Fairlane, the risks got even worse. The dashboard was an unpadded slab of painted steel, gleaming but lethal. Switches, knobs, and chrome accents became shrapnel hazards in even minor crashes. No seatbelts were standard, and few buyers added them even as optional equipment. Bench seats were flat and unsupportive, meaning passengers could be hurled sideways or forward with ease. Steering columns were rigid and non-collapsible, turning into deadly spears in front-end collisions. The overall interior design was based entirely on comfort and aesthetics, with zero regard for crash dynamics. Performance was another compromise. All-drum brakes had no power assist and were highly prone to fade under repeated use. The Fairlane's steering was slow and vague, typical of the era's recirculating ball systems. Suspension was tuned for a soft, floaty ride, not evasive maneuvering or emergency braking. In other words, if something went wrong, the Fairlane was neither agile enough to avoid it nor strong enough to survive it. Ford did offer a new Y-block V8 option for the 1955 Fairlane, the 272 cubic inch Thunderbird Special, but the car's ability to go faster only amplified its safety weaknesses. Ford's advertising leaned heavily into the go factor without addressing the need for better brakes, crash structures, or passenger restraints. In an accident, the extra power made things worse, not better. Unfortunately, the Fairlane's vulnerabilities weren't theoretical. Side impacts were often fatal, even at relatively low speeds. Front-end collisions routinely drove the engine block into the cabin. Rollover accidents almost guaranteed catastrophic roof failure and occupant ejection. In the mid-1950s, crash testing was primitive or non-existent, and most buyers simply assumed that a bigger, heavier car was safer. In reality, the Fairlane's mass didn't mean protection, it just meant harder impacts. The 1955 Ford Fairlane perfectly captured a wider American car culture problem of the time. Safety wasn't a selling point. Appearance, power, and comfort were. Crumple zones, reinforced doors, padded interiors, and collapsible steering columns were still years away. In the absence of federal regulations or public demand, manufacturers had no incentive to prioritize occupant survival. The Fairlane is now often remembered fondly as an icon of 1950s style. But it's important to also remember that beneath the shiny surface was a rolling death trap. The 1955 Ford Fairlane embodied the aspirations of mid-century America, confident, colorful, and forward-looking. But beneath its dazzling skin, it was as vulnerable as any machine from the early post-war years. Thin doors, steel dashboards, and no rollover protection. Weak braking and poor handling. No seatbelts, no side beams, and no structural crash integrity. It offered its owners a thrilling ride, but no real defense when things went wrong. The Fairlane reminds us that true progress isn't just about going faster or looking better. It's about keeping people safe while doing it. Had the 1955 Ford Fairlane been engineered with basic crash safety, even modest improvements like door beams and padded dashboards, could it have set a new industry standard years before Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed? Number 8. In 1955, Plymouth introduced its boldest redesign yet under the leadership of famed stylist Virgil Exner. The company called it the Forward Look. Sweeping lines, flashy chrome, sharp tail fins, and a more modern silhouette. The 1955 Belvedere became Plymouth's flagship for this new era. It looked fast, futuristic, and fashionable, giving the brand a fresh image after years of dowdy designs. But while the Belvedere's styling screamed tomorrow, its engineering still clung to yesterday's compromises, particularly when it came to safety and control. The new Belvedere's body was longer, lower, and wider, but structurally it offered very little protection. No crumple zones or engineered crash structures. Thin door skins with no side impact protection. Steel dashboards with sharp trim and no padding. Roof pillars remained narrow and ornamental, not strength-enhancing. The designers prioritized sleekness over survivability, and the Belvedere's modern look hit a frame that could collapse dangerously in crashes. The Belvedere's drum brakes were carried over from earlier models, despite the car being heavier thanks to larger bodies and more trim. Faster with optional V8 power now available. This mismatch led to real-world problems. Brake fade was common, especially after a few hard stops or on downhill grades. Stopping distances were dangerously long by today's standards. No power assist was standard, meaning drivers had to apply tremendous pressure to stop in emergencies. In critical moments, the Belvedere was simply not able to slow down reliably. While Plymouth improved the car's ride comfort, emergency handling remained treacherous. High center of gravity combined with soft springs meant serious body roll when cornering. The car would wallow and lean heavily, making quick maneuvers unpredictable. Steering was slow and vague, typical of 1950s recirculating ball systems. The Belvedere handled acceptably at leisurely suburban speeds, but in emergency swerves or evasive actions, the suspension geometry turned the car into an unsteady ship. Plymouth finally offered a 241 cubic inch high-fire V8 for the Belvedere, which improved acceleration dramatically. However, increased speed combined with outdated brakes and poor handling created a dangerous mismatch. Plymouth didn't upgrade crash protection to match the car's new performance potential. As a result, many drivers found themselves traveling faster than the car's engineering could safely support, an invitation to disaster on the growing network of American highways. Inside, the story was no better. No seatbelts were standard, and very few buyers opted for them. Flat bench seats with slick vinyl surfaces offered no support during a crash. Rigid steering columns pointed straight at the driver's chest. The metal dash and hard knobs were ready-made for lacerations and blunt force trauma. Occupants had little to no protection beyond their own reflexes, and in the chaos of a crash, reflexes often weren't enough. Despite these flaws, the Belvedere was a hit. Plymouth moved up to third place in national sales for 1955. Buyers adored the fresh looks, colorful two-tones, and booming V8 performance. Few consumers thought about crash survivability. The era's mentality was, if you drive carefully, you won't crash. It would take another decade and relentless advocacy from safety pioneers before automakers and the public took crash protection seriously. The 1955 Plymouth Belvedere symbolized the dazzling optimism of mid-1950s America: style, speed, and the thrill of the open road. Yet beneath its flashy new skin, it was still dangerously out of step with the realities of automotive safety. Weak brakes, poor handling, no crash structure, and minimal interior protection. More power without the corresponding increase in control or survivability. In many ways, the 1955 Belvedere was a classic example of how Detroit raced ahead with design and performance, but left safety decades behind. As we admire its fins and flair today, we must also recognize that it came from a time when image mattered more than lives. A costly oversight that would take years of change to correct. If Plymouth had invested just a small percentage of its forward-look design budget into basic safety innovations for the 1955 Belvedere, could it have changed public expectations and maybe even saved lives? Number 7. The 1955 Buick Special symbolized middle-class prosperity in post-war America. With flashy styling, a plush ride, and an affordable price, the Special was Buick's best-selling model that year, a gateway to luxury for many families. Yet beneath its polished chrome and sweeping lines, the 1955 Buick Special carried serious engineering liabilities, especially regarding safety, braking, and crash protection. It was a heavy cruiser designed for comfortable cruising, not emergency maneuvering, a weakness that could turn deadly in a split second. The 1955 Special was big and heavy, even by the standards of the day. Weighing over 3,800 pounds, it was heavier than most of its direct competitors. Its construction used rigid body-on-frame architecture, which did little to absorb crash energy. No crumple zones or controlled deformation were engineered into the design. In a crash, this rigidity meant the energy of the impact was transferred directly into the cabin, increasing the risk of injury to occupants. One of the 1955 Buick Special's most dangerous flaws was its underpowered braking system. It relied on drum brakes, large but prone to fading when heated during prolonged or repeated use. Despite the car's mass, power brakes were optional, not standard. Stopping distances were alarmingly long compared to smaller or lighter cars. In an emergency, the Special needed a football field's worth of distance to come to a stop, giving the driver precious little margin for error. The Special was engineered for a soft, floaty ride, perfect for the straight highways of the 1950s, but terrible for quick reactions. Soft coil springs and low roll stiffness meant significant body lean during cornering. The steering was slow and vague, typical of recirculating ball systems of the time. Emergency maneuvers, such as swerving to avoid an obstacle, often resulted in loss of control. Drivers were lulled into a false sense of security until they had to react quickly and found the car wallowing unpredictably. The 1955 Special received Buick's new 264 cubic inch nailhead V8, giving it strong, smooth acceleration. The Special could cruise at modern highway speeds, something earlier Buick struggled with. But while speed increased, braking, handling, and crashworthiness did not. The temptation to drive faster was not matched with the technology to stop safely or survive crashes. It became dangerously easy to get in over your head behind the wheel of a car that could go fast but couldn't stop or swerve effectively. The inside of the 1955 Buick Special was stylish but deadly, flat steel dashboard, with hard knobs and trim ready to cause injury in a crash. No seatbelts offered standard, and few dealers even pushed them as options. Steering columns were rigid and directly aligned with the driver's chest. Bench seats were wide and slick, offering no support during a collision. In a frontal impact, the dashboard and steering column acted as unforgiving battering rams, leading to serious, often fatal injuries, even at moderate speeds. Despite its flaws, the 1955 Buick Special was a roaring sales success. Buick sold over 381,000 Specials that year. Customers praised its styling, smoothness, and image of success. Safety concerns were rarely voiced in the mid-1950s. The industry largely ignored the topic unless pressured by government regulators or public outrage, neither of which existed yet in 1955. Buyers loved the dream the Special represented, even if it came with hidden dangers. The 1955 Buick Special embodied everything Americans loved about the automotive boom: size, style, speed, and status. But it also embodied a dark truth of 1950s car design. Comfort and image mattered far more than safety or control. Brakes that couldn't keep up with speed, handling that collapsed under stress, a heavy body that turned collisions into catastrophic forces, an interior that offered no protection whatsoever. Today, we recognize the Special as a beautiful machine of its time, and a clear example of why automotive safety innovations became not just important, but essential. If the 1955 Buick Special had included standard safety features like seatbelts, better brakes, and energy-absorbing dashboards, how would it have changed the way Americans thought about cars and about what made them truly special? Number 6. By 1955, Dodge desperately needed a breakthrough. Their answer was the Dodge Royal, a stylish, powerful sedan equipped with the new Red Ram V8 engine. It brought real excitement to the showroom floor: speed, bold design, and a fresh post-war attitude. But the 1955 Dodge Royal had one major flaw: it wasn't safe. While it could accelerate confidently, it couldn't corner competently or stop reliably. And once inside, occupants were met with hard metal surfaces and zero crash protection. The Dodge Royal's biggest selling point was under the hood. The 270 cubic inch Red Ram V8 delivered lively performance with up to 183 horsepower. For many middle-class buyers, this was their first real taste of V8 muscle. Combined with Dodge's Powerflite automatic transmission, the Royal could move briskly through traffic and hold its own on newly built highways. Performance was no longer a luxury reserved for the rich. Dodge put real horsepower within reach of everyday Americans. While the Royal had power, it lacked refined handling. The suspension was designed for a soft ride, not aggressive driving. Body roll in corners was severe. Drivers reported feeling like the car was about to tip during sudden maneuvers. Steering was slow and imprecise, requiring large inputs for relatively little response. At highway speeds, the Royal floated and swayed. In emergency situations, the Royal's vague steering and soft springs made quick corrections almost impossible. The Royal's braking system was another critical weakness. Four-wheel drum brakes were standard. Under hard use, brake fade became a serious issue. The brakes overheated quickly and lost effectiveness. Given the Royal's relatively heavy weight and increased speed, the stopping distances were dangerously long by modern standards. In essence, Dodge built a faster car, but forgot to upgrade the brakes to match. Inside the Dodge Royal, there was little to protect occupants. No seatbelts were offered as standard or even widely available. Hard steel dashboard surfaces were unforgiving in any impact. Sharp control knobs and chrome trim pieces turned into shrapnel during a crash. Steering columns were rigid and pointed squarely at the driver's chest. In a collision, even a minor one, the interior became a hazard zone, greatly increasing the chance of serious injury or death. Despite its new looks, the Royal's basic frame and body structure were outdated. Built on a traditional body-on-frame chassis, it offered zero energy absorption in a crash. Side impact protection was almost non-existent. The doors were thin shells of metal. The roof offered no rollover protection, particularly dangerous for convertibles. In accidents, the Royal absorbed little of the crash energy, transferring brutal forces directly to the passengers. Despite its safety shortcomings, the Dodge Royal was warmly received. Buyers loved its flashy looks, V8 performance, and affordable price. Sales were strong, helping Dodge rebuild its brand image in the mid-1950s. Few buyers considered safety a major factor when choosing a car in 1955. Automakers, Dodge included, recognized that horsepower and style sold cars, not seatbelts or crumple zones. The 1955 Dodge Royal was a crucial step for Dodge. A vehicle that offered real excitement at a reasonable price. It brought speed and style to the masses, but without modern engineering to control that speed or protect its occupants. In many ways, it reflects a larger truth about 1950s American cars. Performance increased, but safety lagged behind. Style dazzled, while engineering compromises remained hidden until disaster struck. Today, the 1955 Dodge Royal stands as a reminder of a time when going fast was more important than staying safe, and a lesson in why automotive safety standards eventually had to evolve. If Dodge had taken even small steps towards safer construction in 1955, better brakes, seatbelts, stronger frames, could the Royal have set a precedent for other automakers earlier in the decade? Number 5. In 1955, Studebaker was still fighting to survive in a competitive market. Their solution was style, and the Studebaker Commander was a prime example. It offered sleek, modern lines that made many competitors look old-fashioned overnight. But behind the Commander's aerodynamic styling lurked a serious problem: dangerous structural vulnerabilities and almost no passive safety features. In an era when performance and looks trumped engineering caution, the Commander epitomized form over function. Studebaker's styling team delivered a genuinely beautiful car. Smooth, flowing lines inspired by European influences. A lower stance compared to typical 1950s American cars. A clean, uncluttered shape that set it apart from chrome-heavy rivals. Visually, the Commander looks sleek, fast, and futuristic. But that low aerodynamic body came at a price: compromised structural strength, especially around the doors and pillars. One of the most dangerous flaws in the 1955 Commander was the door latch design. Door latches were weak and unreliable, a common issue in many mid-1950s vehicles. In a side collision, or even a hard bump, doors could spring open unexpectedly. Without seatbelts, which weren't standard or often even available, occupants could be ejected from the car during a crash. Rather than containing passengers safely within the vehicle, the Commander's doors could become open traps leading straight to pavement. When accidents did happen, the Commander's structure offered little forgiveness. The car lacked crumple zones or energy-absorbing design features. Crash forces were transmitted almost entirely to the cabin. Thin roof pillars and minimal reinforcement meant the body folded and bent dangerously under stress. Instead of the car sacrificing itself to protect the passengers, as modern cars do, the passengers sacrificed themselves for the car. Even relatively low-speed impacts could cause severe injuries, simply because there was nothing engineered to absorb the blow before it reached human bodies. Inside the 1955 Commander, the dashboard was solid steel, with sharp edges and protruding switches. The steering column was rigid and aimed squarely at the driver's chest. Seats were wide, flat benches with no support or restraints. In a crash, the driver could be thrown into the wheel or dashboard. Passengers could be hurled into each other or out of the car entirely. There were no seatbelts, no airbags, and no padded surfaces. Only hard, unforgiving metal at every point of contact. Mechanically, the Commander wasn't bad for its time. A 259 cubic inch V8 offered respectable power. Handling was adequate on smooth roads, but emergency maneuvers caused noticeable body roll and instability. Braking relied on standard drum brakes, prone to fade under heavy use. Once again, the car's speed potential wasn't matched by its safety potential. Drivers could get themselves into dangerous situations faster than they could get out of them. The Commander sold modestly well in 1955, particularly to buyers who valued modern looks and evade performance. Affordability compared to bigger brands like Ford and Chevrolet. But nobody was asking about crash tests or demanding seatbelts in 1955. The buying public and the manufacturers were still years away from truly considering vehicle safety a selling point. The 1955 Studebaker Commander represents a dangerous truth about the mid-1950s American automotive industry. Innovation in style and advances in speed outpaced any concern for survival and accidents. It was a beautiful car that lured buyers with its modern looks while hiding deadly weaknesses in structure and crash protection. Today, we look back and realize the cost. Thousands of lives lost in cars like the Commander, where a minor collision could become a major tragedy. It's a sobering reminder that good looks are meaningless without good engineering underneath, especially when lives are at stake. What design compromises could Studebaker have made in 1955 to retain the Commander's sleek looks while improving crash protection? Could better door latches and reinforced frames have changed the company's fate? Number 4. The 1955 Chrysler Windsor was marketed as a solid, upscale car for middle-class America. With new styling influenced by Chrysler's forward-look movement, the Windsor seemed modern and commanding on the surface. But under that stylish body, the Windsor was built with the safety philosophy of a bygone era. Heavier is better. Without understanding that rigid mass without controlled energy absorption leads to devastating outcomes in crashes. In short, the Windsor was built like a tank and crashed like one too. The 1955 Windsor featured thick steel panels, heavy frame construction, minimal body flex. This made it feel safe, but the reality was much different. In collisions, modern cars are designed to absorb and dissipate energy before it reaches the passengers. The Windsor did the opposite. It stayed rigid and transmitted the full force of the impact directly to the occupants. Instead of controlled crumpling that could slow down a crash event, Windsor passengers experienced a sudden, brutal stop, exactly the kind of force that causes severe injuries or death. Step inside a 1955 Windsor, and you find a nightmare of safety hazards: steel dashboard with zero padding, sharp chrome trim used heavily across the cabin, pointed control knobs and horn rings. In an accident, even a minor fender bender, these elements became deadly projectiles or impact points. The chrome strips and hooded gauge bezels could lacerate or impale. The solid steering column was a direct spear toward the driver. Door handles and window cranks could cause deep puncture wounds. There were no seat belts, no energy-absorbing steering wheels, and no padded surfaces. The Windsor's interior was like being locked inside a metal and chrome torture chamber once the car was in motion. Despite its mass, the 1955 Windsor relied on standard drum brakes that overheated easily, primitive suspension geometry that encouraged body roll, and nosediving under hard braking. This meant that emergency maneuvers were risky and unpredictable. The heavy front end would dive during hard stops. Rear wheels could lose traction easily. Steering input felt slow and disconnected, making quick corrections difficult. For such a heavy car, the brakes and handling were simply not up to the task, setting the stage for crashes where the car was both hard to stop and hard to control. When a 1955 Windsor was involved in a crash, occupants experienced immediate and intense deceleration. There were no structures to deform and absorb kinetic energy. Rigid components inside and out amplified injuries. A Windsor passenger in a moderate crash faced severe blunt force trauma from hitting the steel dashboard or steering wheel, penetrating injuries from flying chrome fragments, ejection from the vehicle due to non-existent restraints. Unlike modern cars where cabin survival cells are designed to stay intact, the Windsor's passenger compartment offered no controlled collapse, just immediate brutal force. In the 1950s, most consumers equated heavier cars with safer cars. Chrysler leaned into this belief, advertising the Windsor's solid build as a selling point, emphasizing luxury and security without addressing crash survivability. At the time, few buyers asked about crashworthiness. People admired a car's heft, its smooth ride, and its imposing presence, not realizing the lethal risks hiding underneath. The 1955 Chrysler Windsor symbolizes a tragic misunderstanding that dominated mid-century car design. Weight without energy management does not equal safety. Rigid construction without controlled deformation only magnifies injuries. Though it looked magnificent cruising down Main Street, the Windsor was an unforgiving machine in any kind of accident. It's a stark reminder today. Real safety isn't about surviving a crash without a dent. It's about surviving the crash at all. If Chrysler had started designing controlled crumple zones and softer interiors in 1955, How might American automotive safety history have changed? Number 3, the 1955 Lincoln Capri was a statement of luxury and performance in mid-century America. With its bold, sleek design and a powerful V8 engine, the Capri appealed to a generation that valued style and performance. However, beneath the chrome and grandeur, the Capri had severe safety deficiencies that made it a dangerous vehicle in critical driving situations. While it offered plenty of power, the brakes were inadequate for a car of its size, and handling was subpar, especially when quick decisions were needed. In essence, the Lincoln Capri was a car that looked like it could handle anything, but in reality, it couldn't handle the essentials of basic safety. At the heart of the 1955 Lincoln Capri was a large, powerful V8 engine that churned out impressive horsepower and torque, ensuring that the car had more than enough acceleration and cruising power. This made it an exhilarating car to drive on the open road. However, despite the potent engine, the Capri was built with no balance between performance and safety. The braking system was woefully inadequate for its weight and power. Panic stops or any sudden braking required far more distance than the car could safely handle, especially when loaded with passengers. The suspension and handling were tuned for comfort, not performance, making quick maneuvers in tight situations extremely difficult. In essence, the Capri had the power to go fast but lacked the stopping ability to handle its own speed, a dangerous combination that could lead to disaster in an emergency. Braking is the critical component of any vehicle that ensures driver control during high-speed maneuvers. Unfortunately, the 1955 Lincoln Capri was equipped with drum brakes, which were common in the 1950s, but inadequate for such a heavy, powerful car. Here's why. Drum brakes tend to fade under heavy use, especially when subjected to high-speed driving or downhill braking. The size and weight of the Capri exacerbated these issues. The car was large and heavy, and its powerful engine could easily outrun the braking ability. During emergency stops or sudden braking, the brakes would overheat, causing them to lose effectiveness and extend stopping distances dangerously. The combination of weight, speed, and ineffective braking made the 1955 Lincoln Capri especially unsafe for quick stops, turning it into a collision risk in panic situations. When it came to handling, the 1955 Lincoln Capri was not designed for agility or quick responses. The suspension was primarily geared toward comfort rather than precision handling, which made the car floaty and prone to body roll during evasive maneuvers. Here's a breakdown. The soft suspension contributed to poor cornering stability, making the car feel unresponsive during sudden direction changes. Body roll would throw off driver control during hard turns or attempts to avoid a collision. The steering was vague and slow to respond, making the Capri less suited to quick lane changes or swerving around obstacles. This lack of control in critical moments meant that drivers were more likely to lose control during an emergency, increasing the risk of serious accidents. While the 1955 Lincoln Capri was loaded with luxury features like a full leather interior and powerful engine options, it was dangerously lacking in basic safety features. Here's what the Capri lacked. No seatbelts were offered, which meant that, in the event of an accident, passengers had no restraint system to keep them safely in place. The steering wheel was large and rigid, and in the event of a crash, it would have been a lethal projectile for the driver. The metal dashboard had no padding, offering no protection against impacts. There were no crumple zones. If the car was involved in a frontal collision, the driver and passengers would experience the full force of the crash, as there was no controlled way to dissipate the energy. In short, the 1955 Lincoln Capri was a luxury car without luxury and safety. A key issue with the 1955 Lincoln Capri was its structural integrity. While the car had sturdy construction, the sheer rigidity of its frame was a double-edged sword in the event of an accident. The rigid frame meant that the car didn't crumple to absorb crash energy. Instead of a controlled deformation that would protect occupants, the energy from a collision would be directly transferred to the passengers, often leading to severe injuries. The large, heavy body contributed to a higher risk of injury, especially in a crash where the car was unable to bend or absorb the forces in a controlled manner. The 1955 Lincoln Capri was an impressive car in terms of style, power, and comfort, but its inadequate braking system, poor handling, and lack of essential safety features made it a dangerous ride. While it looked majestic and offered V8 performance, the Capri failed to meet the safety standards of its time and could not protect its passengers in an emergency. Number 2. The 1955 DeSoto Fireflite was a car of contrasts. On the one hand, it was powerful, stylish, and part of the post-war optimism that filled the American automotive industry. With its high-performance Hemi Vive 8 engine and futuristic tail fins, the Fireflite was designed to impress. However, beneath its shiny exterior and the allure of V8 power, the Fireflite had serious handling and safety flaws. This vehicle had the performance to excite, but the floaty handling, slow drum brakes, and flimsy side structures made it a risky proposition for drivers, turning every ride into a gamble. Despite being marketed as a luxury car, the 1955 DeSoto Fireflite lacked the critical safety features needed to match its performance. At the heart of the 1955 DeSoto Fireflite was the Hemi Vive 8 engine, an impressive and robust power plant that delivered plenty of horsepower, making the Fireflite one of the faster cars of its time. With its smooth power delivery and acceleration, the engine gave the car the ability to comfortably cruise at high speeds and made it a force to be reckoned with on the road. However, this engine performance was never balanced with the necessary safety and handling features. Powerful acceleration combined with poor handling made the car difficult to control at higher speeds. Despite its impressive engine performance, the car struggled with braking and steering, making it more dangerous in situations that required precision, such as emergency maneuvers or avoiding obstacles. This imbalance between performance and control made the Fireflite a vehicle that could be thrilling to drive but deadly if misjudged. One of the most serious shortcomings of the 1955 DeSoto Fireflite was its braking system. Like many cars of the era, the Fireflite was equipped with drum brakes. While these brakes were common in the mid-1950s, they were less effective than modern systems, especially for a car with a high-performance engine and considerable weight. Here's why the Fireflite's brakes were dangerous. Drum brakes had a tendency to overheat under heavy use, leading to brake fade, which severely reduced braking effectiveness. The heavy weight of the Fireflite, combined with its powerful engine, created the need for stronger, more responsive brakes, which the drum brake system couldn't provide. Longer stopping distances meant that drivers were less able to avoid collisions or quick stops when necessary, increasing the risk of accidents, especially in emergency situations. The lack of disc brakes, which were beginning to gain popularity in performance cars, left the Fireflite outdated in terms of braking capability, making it harder for drivers to control the vehicle when it mattered most. In addition to its braking issues, the 1955 DeSoto Fireflite had major problems with its suspension system, which was tuned more for comfort than for handling. The Fireflite's soft suspension led to what many drivers described as floaty handling. Here's why the floaty suspension was a problem. Body roll and unpredictable handling made it difficult for drivers to maintain control when turning or maneuvering at speed. The lack of suspension control meant that sharp turns or emergency evasive maneuvers often resulted in loss of traction and unwanted oversteering. The heavy body and soft suspension led to a lack of stability, particularly in situations requiring quick responses. At higher speeds or during sudden lane changes, the suspension made the Fireflite feel unsettled, undermining its otherwise powerful performance and making safety a concern for drivers who had to react quickly. Despite being marketed as a luxury car, the 1955 DeSoto Fireflite did not meet modern expectations for safety features. The car's structure was rigid and lacking deformable zones, which are critical in reducing the impact of a collision. Additionally, the Fireflite's side structures were flimsy, which made it more vulnerable to side impact crashes. Here are some issues with the Fireflite structure. The lack of crumple zones meant that, in the event of a crash, the impact forces would be directly transferred to the occupants, leading to more severe injuries. The flimsy side panels were unable to absorb or deflect energy in the event of a side impact collision, which made the Fireflite particularly dangerous in a T-bone crash. The steel dashboard, combined with the lack of seatbelts, added additional risks. In the event of an impact, drivers and passengers were at risk of serious injury from flying forward into the dashboard or steering column. Overall, the lack of modern safety features and structural deficiencies left passengers at high risk in the event of a collision, especially in side impact or rollover scenarios. The 1955 DeSoto Fireflite was a prime example of mid-century automotive design, a car that prioritized style and power over safety and handling. Number 1. The 1955 DeSoto Powermaster was a mid-1950s offering that reflected the last gasp of a fading era in automotive design. It was marketed as a luxury car with modern features, but in reality, its design was outdated and its engineering left much to be desired in terms of safety and performance. The Powermaster suffered from several serious flaws, particularly in its handling, braking, and overall emergency response capabilities. The car's outdated design combined with poor braking performance and subpar handling meant that, in emergency situations, the Powermaster was more of a liability than a reliable mode of transportation. The 1955 DeSoto Powermaster was essentially a carryover design that had been seen in previous DeSoto models. By 1955, the automotive industry had already started to push towards modernization, with more advanced designs and better performance features. However, the Powermaster was stuck in the past, incorporating older engineering principles that had become obsolete in the face of newer, safer, and more responsive cars. The car's chassis and suspension design were based on earlier technologies that lacked modern refinements. The body styling, although solid, didn't reflect the more futuristic trends emerging in the industry. The old-fashioned design elements were reflected in its outdated engineering, making the car feel unresponsive and out of step with the evolving automotive world. While other manufacturers were investing in better handling, improved safety features, and more powerful engines, the Powermaster seemed to stand still, leaving it dangerously behind the curve. One of the most dangerous aspects of the 1955 DeSoto Powermaster was its poor handling characteristics. The Powermaster's suspension system was soft, intended more for comfort than agility, but this made it particularly difficult to control in emergency situations. Here's why the handling was suboptimal. Floaty suspension led to poor cornering stability, meaning that the car was difficult to control during quick turns or lane changes. Body roll made the car feel unsettled at higher speeds, and it struggled to maintain traction during evasive maneuvers. In sharp turns or sudden changes in direction, the Powermaster was prone to oversteering, which could lead to loss of control. This poor handling meant that drivers were less equipped to react quickly in emergency situations. Avoiding accidents was incredibly difficult, especially when faced with a sudden obstacle or the need for quick, evasive action. When it came to braking performance, the 1955 DeSoto Powermaster was woefully inadequate. Despite the car's large size and relatively high power output, the brake system was outdated and underdeveloped for the demands of the time. Key issues with the Powermaster's braking system. Drum brakes. The Powermaster was equipped with drum brakes, which were less effective than the disc brakes that were starting to gain popularity in high-performance cars. These drum brakes had a tendency to overheat and fade, especially during heavy braking or emergency stops. Slow stopping distance. Because the drum brakes couldn't dissipate heat as effectively as disc brakes, stopping distances were significantly longer. In an emergency situation, the chances of avoiding a collision were greatly reduced, and even low-speed accidents could result in severe consequences. Braking fade. The slow fade of the brakes made rapid deceleration difficult. Drivers found themselves unable to stop quickly enough in critical moments, which is a dangerous trait for any vehicle on the road. The brakes simply couldn't match the performance of the engine or the vehicle's size, making the Powermaster a dangerous car to drive in emergency situations. In an emergency situation, the 1955 DeSoto Powermaster was a vehicle with minimal chances of avoiding an accident. Between its poor handling, lackluster brakes, and outdated design, The Powermaster was simply not up to the task of navigating the unpredictable nature of traffic and sudden hazards. Specific challenges and emergencies. Handling instability. In a panic stop or a quick lane change, the Powermaster's floaty suspension and body roll made it difficult to control. Drivers would have a hard time steering sharply or responding quickly to obstacles or other vehicles on the road. Brake fade. With the brake system unable to stop the car quickly, the Powermaster was prone to collision in situations where other vehicles might have had better stopping power. No crash protection. Like many cars of the time, the Powermaster lacked critical safety features such as seat belts, crumple zones, or side impact protection.